The first cue card type is describe a person. There are so many different variations of the people that you might get asked to describe in the IELTS Speaking Task Part 2. It could be something like, describe a teacher you admired. It could be, describe a teacher you didn't like at high school. It could be something like, describe an entrepreneur. Or it could even be about your family. There are so many different ways that this question could be asked, but generally it will be about describing a person. So here are some tips. You don't have to use them. It's just something to keep in mind when you are talking about a person. Tip 1. Say to the examiner who the person is. You can say something like, the person I am going to describe is, and then the name of the person. Tip 2. Say why you chose that person. The reason I chose person X is because. Tip 3, and this is the most important one, tell a story about that person. You can talk about a time you met that person, how you met that person, what that person means to you in your life. Tip number 4, talk about how that person was in the past, in the early days. Talk about who that person is now and who that person might be to you in the future. Again, you don't have to do these, but these are just things you can do if you're running out of things to say in the 2 minutes that IELTS Speaking Test Part 2 gives you. If you do run out of things to say, it's better to just think of another person and start again and think of another person you want to talk about. This stops you from going, I finished. The way you do this is another person I admire or another person in my family I got on with is, and then tell a story about them. It's just about how well you speak naturally. The examiner doesn't really care what you're saying. It's more about how you say it and the grammar and the vocabulary that you use. You can see my model answer with feedback on describe a teacher you admired just up here, and I will put the link in the description. Cue card type 2, describe a place. Again, many different variations on this IELTS Speaking Task Part 2 cue card, but quite often you'll be asked to describe a place or a setting. It might be something like, describe a place you know that is close to nature, or even describe the room in your house that you feel comfortable in. And it could even be something like, describe your favourite fictional place from a book or a movie. Some tips for describing a place, and again, you don't have to use them, and just something to keep in mind if you get these questions for when you're doing your planning. Firstly, just tell the examiner what the place is. The place I am going to describe is. Tip 2, say the reason. The reason I want to describe this place to you is, and then give the reason. Tip 3, and this is a big one for all the descriptions, when you're describing something, it's best to use as many of the different senses as you can. For example, we have sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. So when you're describing a place, you can not only say what it looks like, you can say what it sounds like or what it smells like. Tip 4, try to tell a story about the place. Maybe tell about a time you went there or a memory you have in that place, or one time you were scared and that place made you feel less scared. You can even talk about how the place has changed or what the place used to be like and how it is now. All these things will get you a good score for your vocabulary and grammar for the speaking test, and it will sound natural. Tip 5, again, if you run out of things to say, just talk about a different place. Just say, another place I would like to tell you about is, and again, tell a story about that place and use the senses to describe the place. Again, with all of these questions, you can pretty much ignore the bullet points that are under the question. A lot of people say you have to do each one individually and spend 30 seconds on each. But as I show you in my IELTS Speaking Test Part 2 video that I'll link in the description, it's best just to ignore those bullet points or only use them if you get stuck. Cue card type 3 is describe a thing or describe an object. Again, there are so many different variations on this. You could be asked to describe a toy from your childhood. You might be asked to describe a photograph of yourself that you really don't like, or even something along the lines of describe a type of clothing that you wear often. First tip is, as usual, you should start by your first sentence by telling your examiner what it is that you've picked. The object I want to describe is, and then say the name of the object. Then tip 2 is say the reason. The reason I want to describe this is, or the reason this childhood toy meant a lot to me is because. Tip 3, add a story in there about the object. How did you get this object? Who gave it to you? Why is it special to you? Tip 4, again, use the 5 senses. What does it smell like? What does it feel like? What emotions does it bring out in you? Add all these to the story, the examiner will be impressed. If you run out of things to talk about, just talk about a different object that is in the same category. Try and stick to what is on the card and what is asked you, but if you run out of things to say about this particular object, think of another object that you might be able to talk about as well. I also have a model answer for describe a childhood toy, and you can check that out in the description or click on this link here. Cue card type 4, describe an event. This is my favourite type, and I think it's one of the easiest ones to talk about in the IELTS Speaking Test Part 2, because when you're asked to describe an event, you can talk about the setting and the place that the event is in. You can also talk about the people and the kind of people that were there, so it's like a nice mix of all the other cards, and it's very difficult to run out of things to say when you're talking about an event. Some examples of an event question would be, describe a festival you have attended, or describe a time when you got lost. Or something like, describe a time when you won at a game. The key tips are similar to the other topics. The first one, tell the examiner the event you've chosen. The second tip is say why. So the reason I want to talk about this event is because. Tip 3, give some details about the event. What country or city was it in? What time of year is it held? What's the weather like? Tip 4, tell a story about the time you were at the event or the time the event happened to you. Again, how were you feeling? How old were you? What was the scene? Who were the people there? Describe them. You could even talk about the atmosphere. You can talk about the buzz of the crowd or the anticipation of the event. Or even how you felt. Were you scared, nervous, happy, excited? Use all of these to tell the examiner a story about when you were at the event. If you do run out of things to say, you can talk about a different time of event or a different event that happened to you. But this is the one where I think you should be able to find something to talk about. If you, for example, are talking about a festival, you can talk about all the music, where you slept. You could talk about what food you ate there. This really is an unlimited question, so it's really just asking you to speak naturally and with excitement about an event that happened to you or an event you went to. If you're enjoying this video, give that like button a smash. It really helps the YouTube algorithm get my videos shown to more people. Cue card type 5 is describe an activity. Now, this card will be saying things like, describe an activity that you do after work, or something like, describe an activity that you like to do with your friends. Or even something as simple as, describe an activity you love doing. And again, you should be getting the hang of this by now. The first tip is tell the examiner what the activity is. The activity I like most doing is swimming. The activity I like to do most after work is playing chess. It could be anything, a hobby, a game, a sport. Tip 2, say what the activity involves. You could say some of the benefits. You could say some of the drawbacks. You could say why you love to do it. Is it social? Is it healthy? Great. Why is it social? Why is it healthy? Tip 4, tell a story about a time you were doing this activity and something exciting or fun or even upsetting happened to you. Again, this will give your IELTS Speaking Task Part 2, the cue card answer, some depth. And you'll speak naturally because it's a story that happened to you and you'll naturally be passionate about it. Tip 5, talk about the best time you did this activity or even talk about the worst time you did this activity. Again, it just really fills out your answer, gets you up to that 2 minutes. Finally, you can even describe how you're feeling when you're doing that activity or what that activity entails. For example, what facilities are needed? What time of day do you do it? How much does it cost each time you go? Is there a subscription that you can do it often? These are all little details that you could add in to impress the examiner. Cue card type 6 is describe your favourite something. So it could be something like describe your favourite celebrity, or even something like describe your favourite food. This one is a little bit more of a planning one, and the main tip here that's slightly different from the others is don't waste your planning time thinking what your favourite X is. You need to use your planning for thinking about stories, thinking about things that happened in the past, thinking about feelings and descriptions and the 5 senses. Use your planning time for that. Don't use your planning time thinking what your favourite book or your favourite movie is. Just write the first thing that comes into your head and then build around that. Tip 2, you can start with, my favourite X is Y. So my favourite book is Lord of the Rings. My favourite movie is Pulp Fiction. You should watch it. Tell me your favourite movie in the comments. And then you can just use the tips from cards type 1 through 5 because it might be a favourite place, it might be a favourite person, it might be a favourite object. So you can use the same tips from the previous cue cards. When you take the IELTS speaking test, don't worry about what is going to be on the cue card. Just practice speaking naturally. Check out the video I have listed in the description. It gives you more than 20 tips on how to pass the IELTS speaking task part 2. 99.9% of the time, your cue card is going to be about one of these 6 things we've said in this video. So practice each of them for different types of questions. Remember, whatever you do, don't try to memorize your answer. The examiner will see it and you will not be speaking naturally. And the chances that the one you've prepared for comes up is like 0.1%. So don't listen to these YouTube videos or websites that are telling you these are the questions for this month. It's just baloney. It's not true. It will be, however, describe a place, a person, an object, an event, an activity, or your favourite X. Thank you for watching to the end. Check out this video about tips for the IELTS speaking test part 2, or check out this one, which is a YouTube recommendation. Ooh. Thank you for watching to the end. Good luck and smash those exams.